Picture this. You are standing outside this sprawling, ultra-secure corporate skyscraper.
Okay.
And it's the dead of night. The city is quiet, the streetlights are humming, and the building just looks completely impenetrable.
Right, like a fortress.
Exactly. But inside, walking down those heavily carpeted, dimly lit hallways, there is an invisible intruder.
Oh, man.
And this intruder, they aren't like breaking windows or smashing alarm panels. They're moving silently, methodically, just walking up to every single door in this massive building and just jiggling the handle.
Just checking every single one.
Right, taking meticulous notes, like which doors are locked tight, which ones have a guard right behind them, and, most importantly, which doors have just been left wide open.
Just waiting for someone to walk right in.
Yeah. And in the digital world, this is exactly what hackers do every single second of the day. It's called port scanning.
Yeah, it's basically the absolute foundation of network reconnaissance.
It really is.
It's the moment the theoretical becomes entirely practical because, before an attacker ever launches an exploit, they have to map the building.
Right.
They have to understand the attack surface.
Yeah.
Without port scanning, an attacker is essentially just firing blindly into the dark.
Exactly. And hey, if you want to stay one step ahead of those digital intruders, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this deep dive, so you never miss the insider tips that could, quite honestly, one day save your network and your career.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, be sure to check the description for access to some additional resources we've put together. You will definitely find them valuable.
Building that habit of continuous learning is, it's non-negotiable in this industry. The landscape just shifts way too quickly.
It really does. And speaking of continuous learning, as an independent industry analyst, I am thrilled to welcome you to the 5th of 14 deep dives exploring the architecture of network defense.
Number 5 already.
I know, right? We're moving. So this is based on the textbook Hands-on Ethical Hacking in Network Defense, 4th edition by Wilson, Simpson, and Antill.
A fantastic resource.
Truly. Now, if you were with us for our last deep dive, we unpacked Chapter 4, which was all about footprinting and social engineering.
Right, gathering that initial intelligence.
Yeah, like publicly available data, employee habits, DNS records, doing the homework before ever touching the target's network.
The passive stuff.
Exactly.
So,
but today, we are crossing the perimeter. We're getting into Chapter 5, diving deep into port scanning.
this is where it gets fun.
Oh, yeah. And what makes this discussion so critical is how it mirrors the exact curriculum you'll find in top-tier programs, like Dr. Schuessler's Ethical Hacking and Cybersecurity Operations course, for example.
Right, because we aren't just talking about abstract theory today.
No, not at all. We are analyzing the exact hands-on skills that MIS, CIS, and IT professionals need to master to actually function on day one of a security job.
Yeah, that bridge between academic theory and operational reality is, well, it's where true capability is built.
Definitely.
You can't defend a modern enterprise network if you don't have this really granular understanding of how an attacker perceives your infrastructure. You have to adopt the adversary's perspective.
So let's do that. Let's adopt that perspective right now. Let's talk about the anatomy of a port.
Okay.
Because for our listeners who are, getting deep into their IT careers, we aren't talking about physical Ethernet ports on a wall switch.
No, we're talking about logical constructs here.
Right. There are, 65,535 possible TCP ports?
Yeah, and another 65,535 UDP ports on any given system.
Which is a massive landscape. So how should an IT professional even conceptualize that?
Think of the IP address as like the routing mechanism that gets traffic to the host machine. And the host is our skyscraper, from your analogy.
Right, the building itself.
Exactly. The ports are the specific interfaces or the doors for the services running inside. So port 80 is your standard HTTP web traffic. Port 443 is HTTPS. Port 22 is SSH for secure remote admin stuff.
So the operating system uses these numbers to sort the traffic.
Exactly. It multiplexes the network traffic, making sure that an incoming email, say on port 25, doesn't accidentally get handed over to the web server process.
That makes sense.
And from a scanning perspective, we are sending meticulously crafted packets to these specific numerical addresses and analyzing how they respond.
Just to figure out the port state.
Yep, just jiggling the handle.
So let's break down those states, because this is where the intelligence gathering really starts happening. We're generally looking at 3 primary categories, right? Open, closed, and filtered.
Sure.
Let's start with open. An open port means a service is actively listening and accepting connections.
Correct.
But here's my question. From a system administrator's perspective, an open port is just, well, business as usual. It's how the server works.
Yeah, the website has to be reachable.
Exactly. So why does an open port instantly become a massive red flag during a vulnerability assessment?
Because an open port is an interface.
Yeah.
And every interface is written in code, right? And code has flaws.
So it's an attack surface.
Exactly. When a scanner finds port 80 is open, the attacker doesn't just stop there. A sophisticated attacker will actually interact with that open port to grab what we call the service banner.
They want to see what's behind the door.
Right. They want to know exactly what daemon is listening. Is it Apache? Is it Nginx? IS?
And not just the software, but the version too, right?
Exactly. Once they see, oh, this is Apache version 2.4.49, they pivot. They move away from scanning and go straight into vulnerability research.
They start checking the CVE databases.
Yep. Looking for a known path traversal flaw or, a buffer overflow associated with that exact version. The open port is just the vector. The service behind it is the actual target.
Wow. Okay, so an open port is literally an invitation. Now, what about a closed port? I assume a closed port actively responds to the scanner to say, like, hey, I got your request, but nobody's home.
Yeah, it refuses the connection.
Yeah.
Technically, in TCP, a closed port responds with an RST.
A reset packet.
Right. It's a definitive, unambiguous rejection. The host machine is alive, the packet definitely reached the destination, but the operating system explicitly confirms that no application is bound to that port.
Okay, an unambiguous rejection. But that brings us to the third state, which is, I'd argue, the most complex one.
Filtered ports.
Filtered ports.
Right.
A filtered port indicates that a firewall or some routing rule is actively intervening. You get no definitive answer.
Right.
Let me run an analogy by you. Is a filtered port essentially like a bouncer at a club checking a VIP list, whereas a closed port is just a brick wall?
Oh, that is a fantastic way to visualize it, yeah. The closed port is the brick wall. You knock, the system echoes back. Nobody is here.
Right.
But the filtered port involves active security logic. So the scanner sends a SYN packet, and the firewall intercepts it.
The bouncer steps in.
Exactly. Based on its access control list, the firewall might silently drop the packet entirely, like just throw it in the trash.
Leaving the scanner just hanging there waiting for a timeout.
Yep. Or, depending on the configuration, the firewall might actively send back an ICMP destination unreachable message. The ambiguity is the key here.
The scanner can't tell if the door is actually open or closed.
Right. It only knows its probe was intercepted by something.
But let me push back on that a little bit. If a firewall silently drops a packet, how does an attacker know it's a firewall and not just, I don't know, a dead IP address or a really bad network connection?
That is where the nuance of modern scanning comes into play. You see, scanners don't just send one single packet and give up.
They're smarter than that.
Much smarter. They calculate round-trip times based on earlier probes. They analyze the TTL, or time to live, of the packets that do make it back.
Oh, right.
If an attacker pings a host and gets a reply, they know for a fact the host is alive.
Okay.
But then if they subsequently scan, say, port 3389 for remote desktop protocol, and the packet just vanishes into the ether, no RST packet, nothing, the attacker can logically deduce that a filtering mechanism is selectively dropping traffic for that specific port.
It's a process of elimination.
Entirely.
And that process of elimination leads to another really fascinating technique, OS fingerprinting.
Yes, this is huge.
By analyzing how a target responds to these different probes, scanners can actually guess the operating system running on the target machine. But wait, TCP is a universal standard, right? So if Windows and Linux both use TCP, how do they reveal themselves to the scanner?
Well, TCP is a standard, yes, but the actual implementation of that standard varies wildly.
How so?
The developers who wrote the TCP/IP stack for the Linux kernel back in the day made slightly different foundational choices than the developers at Microsoft.
Oh, I see.
We call these TCP/IP stack anomalies.
What kind of anomalies? Give me an example of what an attacker is actually looking for here.
Let's look at the initial TCP window size.
Okay, the amount of data a machine says it can receive before it has to send an acknowledgement.
Exactly. Windows might default to one specific window size, while an older Solaris machine defaults to a completely different one.
Really? Just out of the box?
Yep. Or look at the default TTL values in an IP packet. Linux often defaults to a TTL of 64. Windows typically defaults to 128.
So a sophisticated scanner just looks at those numbers?
It does more than look. It sends a barrage of very specific, sometimes slightly malformed packets, and analyzes the precise combination of window sizes TTLs, and flag responses.
And it creates a signature from that.
Right. It cross-references that unique signature against a massive database to say, with 95% certainty, this behavior belongs to a machine running Windows Server 2019.
And from an attacker's point of view, knowing the OS is like striking gold. I mean, it dramatically narrows down the exploit phase.
Absolutely.
Why try to force a Windows-specific PowerShell exploit on a machine you've just fingerprinted as an Ubuntu Linux server? It's just a waste of time.
Precisely. Port scanning is not just about finding open doors. It is about profiling the entire architectural makeup of the environment.
Which naturally transitions us into the tactics of how these scans are actually executed in the real world. Because there isn't just one way to jiggle a door handle.
Right, there are a ton of methods.
Let's dive into the varying types of scans, starting with the really heavy, noisy approach versus the stealthy approach. The standard baseline is the TCP Connect scan, right?
Yeah, the Connect scan.
But to understand it, we probably need to briefly establish the TCP three-way handshake for anyone who needs a refresher.
Good idea. The three-way handshake is basically the foundational mechanism of reliable internet communication.
SYN. SYN ACK. ACK.
Exactly. The client sends a SYN packet, which means synchronize, I want to talk to you.
The server responds with the SYN ACK. I synchronize and acknowledge your request.
And finally, the client sends an ACK. I acknowledge your acknowledgement. The connection is officially established.
And then data can flow.
Right. So a Connect scan simply performs that entire three-way dance. It says hello, waits for the reply, and confirms the connection.
But from a network defense perspective, that is incredibly loud, isn't it?
Oh, it's the loudest scan you can possibly run. Because you complete the connection, the application layer actually gets involved.
The software wakes up?
Yeah. The web server or the FTP server actually logs the fact that a full connection was made and then instantly torn down.
So every system administrator's syslog server or their Windows event viewer is going to capture that exact IP address.
It leaves a massive, glaring footprint.
So if a Connect scan is basically a bowl in a china shop, what is the alternative? I assume this brings us to the SYN scan.
Yes, often referred to as a stealth scan or a half-open scan.
How does it manipulate that handshake we just talked about?
Well, the SYN scan intentionally stops short. The attacker scanner sends the initial SYN packet.
Okay.
The target server, assuming it's a legitimate connection request, allocates resources and replies with a SYN ACK.
Like normal.
Right. But right at that exact moment, instead of sending the final ACK to complete the circuit, the attacker's scanner abruptly sends an RST packet.
A reset.
Yep. It essentially hangs up the phone the absolute second the server answers.
And why does hanging up the phone make it stealthy?
Because historically, standard application logs only record fully established connections.
So if the handshake is never completed...
The Apache or ICIS server never technically sees the connection, so it never logs it.
Wow.
The attacker finds out the port is open because they got the SYN ACK, but they completely avoid the application-level audit trail.
Well, wait, I have to challenge that, though.
Okay, go ahead.
We are talking about modern enterprise environments, right? It's 2026. Surely, relying on a SYN scan for stealth today is just a recipe for getting caught immediately.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, next-generation firewalls and dedicated intrusion detection systems, they don't just look at application logs anymore, they monitor the wire.
They absolutely do.
They see anomalous half-open connections. If I'm a SOC analyst, a flood of SYN followed by RST packets is going to light up my dashboard instantly.
You are absolutely correct, and that is a critical point for any early career professional to understand. Stealth is a highly relative term.
Right.
In a mature environment with a properly tuned SIEM and a next-gen firewall, a rapid SYN scan will be flagged in seconds. The firewall's state table tracks those incomplete connections easily.
So why do attackers still use it?
Because SYN scans remain the default for a reason. They are incredibly fast. You don't have to wait for the full connection timeout.
Speed over stealth.
And frankly, on internal flat networks that lack robust internal segmented monitoring, they still largely fly under the radar.
Once you're past the perimeter.
Exactly. But you are right. Against a hardened perimeter, a SYN scan is noisy.
Which explains why attackers had to get creative with their tactics. Let's look at the obscure flags.
Oh, this is fascinating stuff.
Right. If the SYN scan is getting caught by the firewall state table, attackers start trying to exploit the actual rules of TCP itself.
Right.
We have the NUL scan, the FAN scan, and the infamous XMAS scan.
The Christmas tree scan.
Yes. Let's focus on that one. Why on earth is it called an XMAS scan, and what is it actually doing to the network packet?
Well, it's classic hacker nomenclature, honestly. In the header of a TCP packet, there are several Boolean flags, these one-bit values that can be turned on or off to signal what the packet's purpose is.
Like the SYN and ACK flags we just talked about.
Exactly. But you also have the FIN flag to finish a connection, the PSH flag to push data directly to the application layer, and the URD flag to indicate urgent data.
Okay.
In a standard connection, these are used very specifically and usually one at a time. But in an XMA scan, the attacker turns the FIN, PSH, and URG flags on simultaneously.
All at once.
Yeah, the packet is lit up like a Christmas tree.
But, okay, setting FIN, PSH, and URG simultaneously is completely illogical for a legitimate connection. It literally makes no sense. So why do it? Why send a broken, illogical packet?
Because of a very specific loophole in the original RFC 793.
The document that defines the TCP standard.
Correct. The RFC explicitly states that if a port is closed and it receives a packet that does not have the SYN, RST, or ACK flag set, it must respond with an RST packet.
Okay, so closed means it replies with a reset.
But, and this is the loophole, if the port is open, the RFC states that the system should simply ignore the anomalous packet and drop it.
Ah, so the attacker is weaponizing the protocol's own error handling rules against it.
Exactly.
If they send this bizarre Christmas tree packet and they hear absolute silence, they deduce the port is open. But if they receive an RST, they know the port is definitively closed.
You got it. It's an inverse logic. You are essentially scanning for silence.
But again, let's talk operational reality here. Does an XMA scan actually work today? If a firewall sees a packet with FIN, PSH, and URG all set, shouldn't it just drop it instantly as malformed traffic?
Oh, a modern stateful firewall will absolutely drop an XMA scan. It tracks the state of the connection, realizes this packet doesn't belong to any established session, and just discards it.
So it's obsolete.
Not entirely.
Yeah.
And this is why these techniques are still heavily taught. Many networks still rely on older, stateless filtering routers internally.
Oh, right. Internal segments.
Or, they have specific legacy systems like ancient SCADA devices in a manufacturing plant that don't sit behind a next-gen firewall.
That's a scary thought.
And furthermore, understanding an XMAS scan is crucial for defense. When a young SOC analyst is staring at a Wireshark packet capture and sees a flood of FIN, PSH, and URG flags, they need to instantly recognize, okay, this isn't a glitch. Someone is actively trying to bypass our stateless filters.
That makes perfect sense. You can't defend against a tactic you don't fundamentally understand.
Master the attack to fortify the defense.
Precisely. Now, before we move off scan types entirely, we have to talk about UDP.
Oh, UDP.
Yeah. Everything we've discussed so far, SYN, Connect, XMAS, that's all TCP. UDP, the user datagram protocol, is a totally different beast. Why is UDP scanning universally despised by security professionals?
Because UDP is inherently connectionless.
Right.
There is no polite three-way handshake.
Right.
A UDP application just fires data at a target and hopes it gets there. It's like sending a letter through the postal service with no return receipt requested.
So when you scan a UDP port,
you basically just send an empty UDP packet. And if the port is open, the service typically doesn't respond at all. It just absorbs the packet.
Scanning for silence again. But silence could also mean the packet was dropped by a firewall or just lost in transit over the internet.
Exactly. The only definitive response you get in a UDP scan is if the port is closed. If it's closed, the target's operating system is supposed to send back an ICMP Type 3 Code 3 message.
Which means destination port unreachable.
Right, so you rely entirely on that ICMP error message.
But I imagine network administrators restrict those error messages, right?
They absolutely do. Operating systems explicitly rate limit ICMP error messages to prevent denial of service attacks.
Right.
So Linux, for example, might only allow one ICMP unreachable message per second.
Oh, wow.
So think about it. If you are trying to scan 65,000 UDP ports and the system only responds once per second, your scan is going to take 18 hours for a single host.
That is brutal.
It is agonizingly slow, prone to massive false positives, and highly unreliable. But you can't ignore it.
Why not?
Because critical foundational services like DNS on port 53 and SNMP on port 161, they run on UDP. You would check them.
The complexity is just staggering.
It really is.
And to manage this level of complexity, IT professionals rely on specialized software, which brings us to the actual toolkit used out there in the field. When we talk about port scanning, there is one undisputed king of the hill, right? Nmap.
Nmap, short for Network Mapper.
Right.
It was written by Gordon Lyon, better known as Fyodor, way back in 1997 for Frac magazine. And it is, without exaggeration, one of the most important pieces of security software ever written.
It's the absolute industry standard.
Hand down.
Now, I know there are graphical user interfaces available for it, like Zenmap, which is really great for visualizing the network data. But in professional academic programs like Dr. Schuessler's course and in real-world SOCs, there is a massive emphasis on running Nmap strictly from the command line.
Oh, definitely.
Why the resistance to GUIs? If Zenmap is easier, why not just use it?
Because a GUI obscures what the tool is actually doing beneath the surface.
Yeah.
And it severely limits your flexibility. When you are a professional, you are very often SSH into a remote server, operating purely in a bash terminal. You don't have a desktop environment.
You don't even have a mouse.
Exactly. If you only know how to click the intense scan button in Zenmap, you are totally helpless on a command line.
Right.
Furthermore, command line proficiency allows you to chain tools together using pipes. You can have Nmap output its findings directly into a text file, and then use a bash script to feed that text file directly into another tool. You just can't do that effectively with a GUI.
Let's talk about the syntax then. If I'm a junior analyst and I type nmap sst-192.168.1950, what exactly am I commanding the engine to do there?
Let's break that syntax down.
Yeah.
Nmap obviously calls the program.
Right.
The NSS flag tells the engine to perform a SYN scan, that half-open, relatively fast scan we discussed earlier.
Okay.
The P flag is critical. By default, Nmap only scans the top 1,000 most common ports to save time. But by adding P, you are explicitly ordering it to scan all 65,535 ports.
Don't miss a single door.
Right. And then obviously the IP address is your specific target.
What about the ICO flag or the AV flag? Those are common too.
Capital FIO enables OS fingerprinting. It instructs Nmap to send those malformed packets we talked about to analyze the TCP stack anomalies.
Nice. And V.
That stands for verbose mode. And honestly, this is a lifesaver.
Why is that?
Because instead of Nmap running silently in the background for 10 minutes and making you wonder if your terminal just froze, verbose mode forces the engine to print its findings to the screen in real time.
Oh, so as soon as it finds port 443 open, it prints it.
Exactly. It gives you immediate situational awareness.
Nmap is incredibly powerful, but it's not flawless. Let's debate its utility in a modern context for a second.
Sure.
It has the Nmap scripting engine, the NSE, which allows users to write custom scripts to automate complex networking tasks. But those scripts are written in Lua.
They are.
Is forcing students and early career pros to learn a niche language like Lua a worthwhile investment of their time? I mean, Python is the undisputed king of security scripting today.
That is a very, very common debate in the industry right now. You're right. Lua isn't as ubiquitous as Python.
Not even close.
But the architecture of Nmap requires a language that is exceptionally lightweight, easily embeddable, and incredibly fast. Lua fits that bill perfectly.
So you just have to learn it.
Well, you don't necessarily need to become a master Lua developer, but you absolutely must understand how to leverage the hundreds of pre-written NSE scripts that already come with Nmap.
What kind of scripts are we talking about?
Oh, there are scripts to bypass firewalls, scripts to perform advanced HTTP enumeration, and even scripts to check for specific vulnerabilities like Eternal Blue right from the scanner.
That's amazing.
The NSE essentially transforms Nmap from a simple port scanner into a modular Swiss Army knife.
But there is a massive operational risk with Nmap that I really want to highlight for our listeners.
The crashing issue.
Yes. An aggressive Nmap scan can actually take down network infrastructure, right? If you scan a fragile IoT device or an old legacy switch too aggressively, you can straight up crash it.
Absolutely you can. Nmap can generate thousands of packets per second. If you unleash an aggressive, highly parallelized scan against, say, an industrial control system or an old IP security camera,
it just can't handle the traffic.
It overwhelms its TCP/IP stack. The device runs out of memory trying to process all those SYN requests, and it kernel panics and reboots.
And if that device is controlling a critical manufacturing process,
your routine security audit just caused a massive outage.
That is a bad day at the office.
It is a terrible day. This is why professionals must understand timing templates in Nmap, using flags like NANST2 to intentionally slow the scan down to a crawl, just to ensure the target device can handle the load. You cannot just fire and forget in a production environment.
So Nmap finds the open doors and maybe gives us the OS in the service version, but identifying that a door is open is really only half the battle. We need to know how weak the lock is.
Right.
This is where we transition from basic port scanning to vulnerability assessment. And the heavyweight in this arena is Nessus, developed by Tenable.
Yes, Nessus.
How does Nessus fundamentally differ from what Nmap is doing?
Well, Nmap is a reconnaissance tool. Nessus is an auditing tool.
Okay, unpack that.
Zenmap says, hey, port 22 is open, and it is running OpenSSH version 7.2.
Right.
Nessus takes that specific information, cross-references OpenSSH 7.2 against a massive, constantly updated database of known vulnerabilities, and generates a report.
Saying what?
Saying, OpenSSH 7.2 is vulnerable to CVE 2016-622IL, which allows for username enumeration. Here is the CVSS severity score, and here's the recommended patch. Nessus provides actual actionable remediation intelligence.
Wow. It connects the technical finding to the actual business risk.
Exactly. It translates raw packet data into a risk profile that a CISO can actually use to allocate patching resources.
Nessus is undeniably powerful, but let's be honest about the barriers to entry here. Nessus Professional is an enterprise-grade tool, and it comes with an enterprise-grade price tag.
It's not cheap.
For a small to mid-sized business or, an independent consultant just starting out, dropping thousands of dollars on a Nessus license isn't always feasible. Now, I know there's Nessus Essentials, the free version, but it restricts you to scanning only 16 IP addresses.
Right, which is virtually useless for a real full-scale network audit.
Exactly. The cost is a significant barrier, which is why the open source community stepped up. This is where OpenVAS, which is now branded as Greenbone Security Assistant, enters the picture.
OpenVAS is a really fascinating case study in software evolution.
Yeah, tell us about that history.
Years ago, Nessus was actually an open source project itself. But when Tenable decided to transition it to a closed source commercial model, a group of developers took the last open source version of the Nessus code and they forked it.
Creating an independent, community-driven project.
Right. And that fork eventually grew into OpenVAS.
So if I'm a student or I'm managing a really tight IT budget, is OpenVAS a legitimate one-to-one replacement for Nessus?
It is a highly capable alternative, yes, but it does require more operational overhead.
What do you mean by overhead?
Well, Nessus is polished, it works seamlessly out of the box, and you get incredible customer support. OpenVAS requires you to actually manage the infrastructure yourself.
Oh, I see.
It functions essentially as the database server. You have to manage the vulnerability database, the scanning engine, and the client interface. And you have to ensure the NVTs, the network vulnerability tests, which are essentially the plugins that check for the specific flaws. You have to make sure those are constantly updated.
So it's more hands-on.
Much more. But for a team with the technical chops to manage it, OpenVAS provides enterprise-level vulnerability scanning completely for free.
Now, there is a critical operational warning associated with OpenVAS and, honestly, vulnerability scanners in general that we really need to emphasize for our listeners.
The safe checks.
Yes. When configuring a scan policy, there is an option to enable safe checks. If I am running a vulnerability scan against a client's live production environment, why is it absolutely mandatory that I ensure safe checks are enabled?
Because some vulnerability checks are inherently destructive.
Explain that.
Let's say the scanner wants to determine if a web application is vulnerable to a buffer overflow attack. Without safe checks enabled, the scanner's plugin might actually execute a real buffer overflow payload against the server just to see if it crashes.
Oh my God.
Right. If the server is vulnerable, the test succeeds by literally crashing the live production server.
So if you're auditing an e-commerce platform during business hours,
and you take their database offline, you are going to be having a very, very uncomfortable conversation with their legal department.
Uncomfortable is an understatement.
Enabling safe checks forces the scanner to rely solely on banner grabbing and version analysis rather than actively attempting to exploit the flaw. It ensures your audit does no harm.
Do no harm, the Hippocratic Oath of ethical hacking.
Exactly.
Okay, let's pull back the lens for a second. We've talked deeply about how to scan ports with Zenmap and how to analyze vulnerabilities with Nessus and OpenVAS.
Right.
But this all assumes we already have a list of IP addresses to target.
Which you rarely do at the start.
Right. In a massive enterprise, a standard 16 subnet has over 65,000 potential IP addresses. You cannot run a full Zenmap port scan and a Nessus vulnerability scan against 65,000 IP.
Oh, it would take weeks, and the network noise would be absolutely catastrophic.
So how do professionals map the perimeter first? How do they identify the active powered-on host before they ever start port scanning?
This is the crucial preliminary step known as the ping sweep.
Okay.
Before you start checking the doors, you have to figure out which buildings actually exist on the street. A ping sweep takes a massive block of IPs and sends a very simple, low-overhead probe to every single one just to see if machine is alive.
And in standard networking, this is done using ICMP, the Internet Control Message Protocol, specifically an ICMP Type 8 message, which is an echo request.
Right. It's essentially digital sonar. The scanner sends an ICMP Type 8 echo request. Are you there?
And if the target machine is powered on and connected,
The TCP/IP standard dictates it should reply with an ICMP Type 0 message, an echo reply. Yes, I am here. Ping pong.
but the real world is rarely that simple, is it? Network administrators know that attackers rely on ping sweeps, so they actively throw up roadblocks. What happens when that standard ping-pong interaction breaks down?
The primary roadblock is that administrators will configure edge firewalls or even the local Windows Defender firewall on the host machine itself to just drop all incoming ICMP echo requests.
Or they configure the machine to process the request, but intentionally suppress the Type 0 echo reply.
Exactly. So the scanner asks, "Are you there?" And the fully functioning, highly vulnerable server remains dead silent.
So a standard ping sweep will report that IP address as empty, entirely missing a live target.
Yep.
Which means relying on the basic Windows command line ping tool is insufficient for a professional. We need purpose-built mapping tools. So let's contrast two of the most critical tools for this job, Fipping and HM3.
Fipping is your absolute workhorse for bulk standard mapping.
How does it differ from regular ping?
Well, the standard ping command is serial. It pings one host, waits for a reply, and then moves on to the next one. If a host is dead and the timeout is, say, 2 seconds, scanning 255 hosts takes over 8 minutes.
Way too slow.
Right. Forking's parallelized. It takes a list of IPs and blasts them all simultaneously in a round-robin fashion.
Now, I know one of the most useful flags in IFing is the JASH flag. How does that actually save an analyst time?
The JASH flag generates the target list for you dynamically. Instead of having to create a massive text file containing every single IP address in a subnet manually, you simply type fping-g 192.168.1.192.168.168.1.254.
And it does the math.
Yes. Fping automatically calculates the range, generates the IPs in memory, and sweeps the entire subnet in seconds. It outputs a clean list of which hosts are alive and which are unreachable.
That is efficient. But again, effing still relies on standard ICMP.
It does.
So if the admin has blocked ICMP, effing is just as blind as regular ping.
Completely blind.
This is where H3 comes into the picture. And honestly, this is where we move from basic administration into advanced cybersecurity operations. Because H3 is not just a scanner, it is a packet crafter.
It is a remarkable tool.
Let's unpack what crafting a packet actually means for a listener trying to visualize this process.
This is one of the most powerful concepts an IT professional can master. Normally, when you want to access a website, your web browser and your operating system's network stack handle all the complex packet creation behind the scenes.
Right.
They format the headers, they set the flags, establish the checksums, and send the data. You have no control over the granular details.
H3 strips away that automation, doesn't it?
Completely. It gives you raw, manual control over every single field in the TCP/IP header.
So think of a packet like a physical letter. The operating system usually writes the return address, the destination address, and seals the envelope for you. But with H3, I am manually writing the envelope myself. I can change the return address, the source IP.
Exactly. Changing the source IP is known as spoofing. With HEBing3, you can send a packet to a target, but manipulate the header so the target thinks the packet originated from its own internal router or, from the CEO's workstation.
But wait, let's explore the actual mechanics of that.
Yeah.
If I spoof the source IP, making it look like the packet came from someone...
The target replies to the idle machine. By observing how the idle machine's IP-ID sequence increments in response to that unexpected packet, the attacker can infer whether the target port was open or closed.
All without ever sending a packet from their own true IP address.
It is the ultimate stealth technique.
That is mind-blowing. You are bouncing the interrogation off a third party to remain entirely invisible. But beyond spoofing, HPing3 allows you to crack packets to interrogate firewall logic, right?
Oh, yes.
If standard ICMP is blocked, how does an analyst use HPing3 to map the network?
If the firewall drops ICMP, we craft a TCP packet instead.
Yeah.
We use HPing3 to manually generate a TCP packet targeting port 80, but we explicitly set the ACK flag.
So we send a packet that says, I am acknowledging the data you sent me, even though no connection was ever established.
Exactly.
Why do that?
Because stateless firewalls often allow ACK packets through, assuming they belong to an already established connection that the firewall simply didn't see the beginning of.
Oh.
The packet bypasses the firewall and hits the target server. The target server receives an ACK for a connection that doesn't exist, so it sends an RST packet back.
A reset.
Boom. We just received an RST packet.
Huh.
We now know with absolute certainty that the host is alive, even though ICMP was completely blocked. We bypassed the perimeter defense by interrogating its specific rule set.
This level of granular control is really what separates an entry-level technician from a true cybersecurity engineer.
Yeah, absolutely.
But let's be pragmatic here. Managing these tools, typing out complex HP3 syntax, analyzing responses, doing this manually across hundreds of subnets is impossible. It just doesn't scale.
Yeah.
If you try to run these tasks by hand, you're going to burn out in your first month on the job.
Which brings us to the ultimate force multiplier in IT automation and shell scripting.
Yes.
You cannot survive in modern infrastructure management or cybersecurity without the ability to automate repetitive tasks. A script is simply a customized computer program, just a text file containing a sequence of commands that the operating system executes in order.
I want to break down a practical example of shell scripting. Let's walk through the logic of a basic bash script designed to automate a ping sweep.
Okay, let's do it.
The goal is to generate a list of IP addresses from a standard Class C subnet, say 192.168.85.1 to 192.168.85.254, and write them to a text file that we can then feed into epping. How does a while loop accomplish this?
Well, a while loop is a foundational control flow statement in programming. It evaluates a condition, and as long as that condition remains true, it repeatedly executes a block of code.
Right.
In this scenario, we initialize a variable, let's call it count, and set its value to 1.
Count1.
Then we write the loop condition, while count jilligrol 253.
Which translates to, while the value of count is less than or equal to 253, do the following actions.
Right. Inside the loop, we instruct the script to echo the base IP string, 192.168.85, and append the current value of the count variable to the end of it. We then redirect that full IP address into a text file.
So the first time through the loop, it prints 192.168.85.1 into the file.
Correct. Then, the final command inside the loop increments the count variable by 1. The script hits the end of the loop, goes back to the top, and checks the condition again.
Is 2 less than or equal to 253? Yes.
So it runs again. It prints point 2, then point 3. It runs in milliseconds, generating the entire list flawlessly.
I noticed you explicitly stopped the loop at 253, meaning the final IP it generates is 192.168.85.254. Why did you structure the loop condition to stop before hitting point 255? Why not sweep the very last IP in the subnet?
That is a critical nuance that highlights the difference between a coder and a true network engineer.
Ah, okay.
In IPv4, on a standard 24 subnet, the .255 address is the broadcast address.
Meaning a message sent to that address doesn't go to one machine, it goes to every single machine on the local network segment.
Exactly. If your script carelessly generates the .255 address and you feed that into a ping sweeper, you will send an ICMP echo request to the broadcast address. Every single active machine on that subnet will receive the request and simultaneously try to send an echo reply back to you.
That sounds like a recipe for a massive traffic spike.
It creates a broadcast storm. In fact, this mechanism is the foundation of a classic denial of service attack known as a Smurf attack,
where an attacker spoofs the victim's IP and pings the broadcast address, causing the entire network to unknowingly attack the victim with replies.
Right. So by intentionally hard-coding the while loop to stop at 254, the analyst demonstrates a real understanding of the underlying network architecture and avoids causing a self-inflicted outage.
That is the operational wisdom you only get from practical, hands-on experience. But let's talk about the environment where you are actually writing these scripts. Because when you are SSH into a headless Linux server, meaning there is no graphical interface, no desktop, no VS Code, you have to write these scripts using command line text editors.
You do.
And the undisputed, often feared king of command line editors is Vim.
Ah, Vim. It is practically a rite of passage for IT professionals.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a second. It is 2026. We have massive, feature-rich, integrated development environments. We have AI code assistance. Why are academic programs and industry certifications still forcing students to memorize the bizarre keyboard shortcuts of a modal text editor from the 1970s? It feels archaic.
I completely understand the frustration, but there's a very pragmatic reason for it. Vim is ubiquitous.
It's everywhere.
It is installed by default on virtually every UNIX and Linux distribution on the planet. When you're responding to an incident at 3:00 a.m. and you have a reverse shell into a compromised, stripped-down web server, you do not have VS Code. You do not have Nano. You have VIA or Vim.
That's a sobering thought.
If you need to quickly edit an Apache configuration file to mitigate an ongoing attack and you don't know how to navigate Vim, you are paralyzed. It is the lowest common denominator for survival in a Linux environment.
Okay, I concede the necessity. It's a survival skill. But let's demystify it for our listeners. The core confusion with Vim is that it is a modal editor. You can't just open a file and start typing.
Right. In a normal editor like Notepad, you hit a key and the letter appears on the screen. Vim operates in distinct modes. When you open a file in Vim, you are placed in command mode by default.
And in command mode, your keystrokes do not type text.
Right, they execute commands. If you hit the D key, it doesn't type a D. It prepares to delete something.
So how do I actually write my bash script?
You have to switch to insert mode. You do this by pressing the I key for insert before the cursor, or the key to append after the cursor. Once you hit I, the bottom of the screen says insert. Now, it functions like a normal text editor. You type your code.
But the trap is, when you are done typing, you can't just hit Ctrl-S to save. You have to exit insert mode first.
Crucial step. You press the escape key. This drops you back into command mode. And this is where the power of Vim really shines, because now you can navigate and edit the document with incredible speed using just a few keystrokes.
Let's run through some of those essential command mode shortcuts that every analyst should commit to memory.
Okay, well, if you want to delete a single character, you press X. If you want to delete an entire word, you press DW delete word.
Got it.
If you need to rip out an entire line of code, you press DD. And if you realize you made a mistake and want to paste that line back somewhere else, you press P to put it back.
It sounds like a secret language, but I can see how once you memorize it, your hands never have to leave the home row of the keyboard. You aren't reaching for a mouse.
Exactly. It is designed for maximum typing efficiency.
And then we reach the most infamous challenge in all of computer science: how to exit Vim.
Oh yeah, it's a running joke in the industry, but it's simple once you know it. While in command mode, you type a colon to enter X mode at the bottom of the screen.
Okay.
Then you type WQ and hit enter. The W stands for write, which saves the file, and the Q stands for quit.
Write and quit?
Alternatively, you can just hold Shift and press ZZ to save and exit immediately.
Write and quit.wq. It is essential knowledge. And taking a step back, looking at everything we've discussed today, from understanding the nuances of a TCP SYN scan, to identifying vulnerabilities with OpenVAS, to crafting custom packets with H.Schuessler, and finally automating the entire workflow with bash scripts written in Vim. This is the entire operational pipeline.
It really is the full spectrum of reconnaissance. The transition from someone who just clicks a button in a GUI tool to an engineer who understands the packet-level flow of the network, writes their own automation, and fundamentally understands the architecture they're auditing.
That's the leap.
Yeah, that is the transition from an entry-level worker to a cybersecurity leader. That is the exact outcome a program like Dr. Schuessler's course is driving at.
It's about building genuine capability, not just rote memorization. So let's recap the core takeaways from this massive deep dive into port scanning.
Sounds good.
We started by defining the battlefield, understanding how 65,535 ports serve as the gateways into an operating system, and how the states of open, closed, and filtered provide clues about the security posture of the target. We explored the mechanics of OS fingerprinting, analyzing how subtle anomalies in the TCP/IP stack reveal the underlying operating system.
And then we dissected the varying tactics of the scan itself. The noisy, easily logged TCP connect scan versus the fast, relatively stealthy SYN scan. We explored how attackers manipulate protocol rules with Xmas, NOL, and FIN scans to bypass older stateless firewalls, and we discussed the inherent difficulties and unreliability of UDP scanning.
We then evaluated the essential toolkit, Nmap, the undisputed industry standard for port mapping and OS detection; Nessus, the enterprise heavyweight for translating open ports into actionable vulnerability reports; OpenVAS, the powerful open-source alternative for teams willing to manage their own infrastructure.
And we emphasized the critical importance of utilizing safe checks to ensure our audits never compromise production environments.
Always do no harm. We moved into perimeter mapping, utilizing tools like FIPing for rapid bulk ICMP sweeps and graduating to H.Schuessler for granular packet crafting, allowing us to spoof source addresses and bypass perimeter filtering by manipulating individual TCP flags.
And finally, we brought it all together with the ultimate survival skill, automation. We broke down the logic of a bash while loop to intelligently generate target lists without triggering broadcast storms, and we demystified Vim, cementing the keystrokes needed to operate efficiently in a headless Linux environment.
It is a dense, technically demanding body of knowledge, but these concepts are the bedrock of network defense. You will rely on this understanding every single day of your career.
Absolutely.
Think back to that ultra-secure corporate skyscraper we visualized at the very beginning of our conversation. You no longer just see a building, you now have the architectural blueprint.
You know exactly how the intruders check the locks.
You understand the techniques they use to bypass the bouncers and the guards. And more importantly, as a network defender, you now possess the knowledge and the tools to proactively analyze your own building, identify the weak points, and build stronger, more resilient doors before the adversary ever arrives.
You hold the attacker's playbook. You must use it to audit your perimeter continuously.
Absolutely. I want to sincerely thank you for joining this deep dive as the invisible third person in our conversation today. If you found this rigorous exploration valuable, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this audio with your peers. Check the description right now for links to those valuable academic and career resources we mentioned. They are specifically curated to help you operationalize what you've learned today.
The field of cybersecurity rewards those who never stop investigating. Keep pushing your understanding deeper.
On that note, I highly encourage you to review our channel for other videos and playlists to help you continue your education. We have incredible deep dive content available. Be sure to listen to our Digital Forensics podcast series and our Network and Systems Security podcast series.
Highly recommend those.
They provide a fantastic complementary perspective to the offensive tactics we discussed today, focusing heavily on incident response and architectural hardening.
They are essential listening for a well-rounded defense perspective.
And be sure to join us next week, because the journey doesn't stop here. We will be tackling Chapter 6, Enumeration. Port scanning tells us that a door is open and what service is running. Enumeration is where we aggressively interact with that service to extract real, tangible data.
Getting the good stuff.
We'll be pulling usernames, system groups, routing tables, and network shares. We move from mapping the perimeter to interrogating the interior. It gets incredibly technical, and the stakes get very real very fast.
Yeah, if port scanning is finding the open door, enumeration is walking inside and opening the filing cabinets.
I couldn't have said it better. Before we go, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. When you get home tonight, think about your own personal network, your Wi-Fi router, your smart TV, your IoT thermostat, your home security cameras. If someone ran a highly aggressive, comprehensive Nmap scan against your home public IP address right now, what open doors do you think they would find? Master the attack, fortify the defense. Until next time, keep your hands on the keys and your network secure.